Hi again, and welcome to our second video in this series, which will be on the biological effects of the Cretaceous extinction. So you learned in the first video that the end Cretaceous was the most recent of the 5 largest mass extinctions. It was about 66 or 66.04 million years ago, and it was caused by the impact of this really big 10-mile wide asteroid that hit what is now the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. So evidence for the asteroid impact has been extensively documented from locations all over the world, which you heard about a little bit in the last video, but today we'll focus on what happened to life, and in particular marine life, since our next video, the last one in this series, will focus on mammals during the extinction. So you'd imagine that the extinction should have been very abrupt, since an asteroid impact is basically an instantaneous thing. But was that the case? So the figure here shows the range of 10 different ammonite species from Seymour Island in Antarctica, which is a very well-studied site for the Cretaceous extinction. And ammonites are these sort of squid-like animals, but they lived in a coiled shell, and they're all extinct now. So each of the vertical lines here is the range of a single species. They go from the older rock layers at the bottom to the younger rock layers at the top. And the iridium anomaly, the horizontal gray line there, shows the time of the asteroid impact. So what gives here? When you look at these, and it looks like all the ammonites went extinct before the iridium anomaly, for one, and it looks like they kind of went extinct gradually. You know, 1 or 2 at a time, 3 at a time. So that's kind of unexpected. But, and you might expect this, there's a catch here. So let's just step back. Okay, imagine you're collecting fossils from a series of rock layers such as this one. You can see the layers kind of going from the bottom to the top. They're tilted a little bit now. And you're looking for this particular, crazy looking ammonite here. So you start looking in the bottom rock layer here, the lowest one, which is the oldest at least at this point, at this place. But you don't find the ammonite. So you start working up the layers, and you look very carefully in each layer, and oh look, we found a specimen. It's in this layer here. So let me look at the next rock layer. Oh, it's not there. And did it go extinct? Well, maybe, but let's keep looking. So we keep looking, and oh, we found another one up here now. So great. It didn't go extinct before. We just didn't find it. It wasn't here. We didn't find it. It maybe was living elsewhere. Maybe it's not that common, and so it didn't fossilize. We don't have it. We have a finite amount of stuff we can look at too. Maybe it's like 1 foot into the cliff, and we can't see it in there. Anyhow, so let's keep looking. So we keep looking. Is in the next layer? No. Next layer? No. Maybe it did go extinct here. And then we keep going, but wait, oh, it's up here again. Okay, so it seems like this thing's not that common, but so let's keep looking. We keep looking in the higher rock layers. We don't find it. It's not present in any of the higher layers of rock at this location. So when did it go extinct? Well, maybe, it's possible. Maybe it really did go extinct just right after that very highest one, the third one we found. But that seems kind of unlikely because we missed it in lots of other rock layers, right? So, the key point here is that we can never really be 100% confident in the exact time. But we can use sort of statistics to come up with a probability or a chance that the species went extinct before a particular time, right? We might think like, oh, it's pretty likely that if it was alive, we would have found it in some of these higher rock layers. So maybe it went extinct, before the top of our section here somewhere, but we don't know where exactly. But let's consider this other species here. And okay, so let's go and look for it. We go look carefully through our rock layers again. We find it here, we find it here, we find it here, like all over the place. So this one's obviously a pretty abundant one. But we didn't find it in the top 4 or 5 layers, right? So when did it go extinct? In this case, you're probably a bit more confident that you're like, well, this thing's pretty common. We found it all the time, like in almost every layer, not quite every layer, but almost every layer we looked for it. So, if it really was alive, what are the chances we would not find it in those top 5 rock layers? Like maybe we wouldn't find it in one of them, but we should find it at least in some of them if it was still alive. So, we might think like, well, it probably went extinct, soon after the last one that we found at some point. Another thing to consider is that how confident would you be that the yellow species actually went extinct earlier at a lower layer than the red one? Yeah, I mean, it's true that the youngest fossil of the red ammonite is higher up in our rock layers, but would you bet money? How much money would you bet that it actually survived longer than the yellow one? Given that the yellow one is rare, maybe they actually went extinct around the same time. But because the yellow one is just so rare, we didn't find those last ones. So this phenomenon is called the Signor-Lipps effect. And it basically says that a truly abrupt extinction will end up looking more gradual because of this incomplete sampling, especially because rare species will appear to go extinct, will find their youngest fossil that we found well before the true time that they actually disappeared, right? Maybe it was living elsewhere. Maybe if we looked harder, we'd find it, all these things. So as I mentioned very briefly before, right, it is possible to use statistics to kind of estimate when we think the extinction might have happened. And surprisingly, back to our ammonites from Antarctica here, there's roughly a 90%, we can come up with sort of a 90% bar. We're like, okay, there's a 90% chance, more or less, that these 10 ammonites went extinct in a single event, and our best guess includes the iridium anomaly, actually. That's what this 89% CI thing is, roughly speaking. So it looks gradual, but because of this sort of sampling effect, and especially because some species are common and some are rare, it's actually probably most likely that all these ammonites did in fact go extinct abruptly and during the asteroid impact. We can never be 100% certain, but that seems like it's the most likely explanation here. So this Signor-Lipps effect is much less of a problem for abundant fossils because they're found in nearly every sample. Right? If you always find a particular species when you're looking for it, you're going to be pretty confident that when you stop finding it, you're like, oh, well, it must have really gone extinct. I found it all the time. It's there, it's always there, and now it's gone. Well, we can probably have a pretty good idea of when it went extinct. Right, and so the record that's shown here is for these microscopic fossils called foraminifera from a site in Spain. And because these fossils are microscopic and very abundant, they're present in basically every sample. You can't really read the names here, which is not important, but basically again each column is a different species, and you can see that basically in every single sample we find these, and then they all disappear. Right, so basically the extinction looks super abrupt at that red line there, and well, it is an abrupt extinction, and there really is very little, if any, Signor-Lipps effect here. What about dinosaurs? So one of the best records of the Cretaceous extinction on land comes from a bunch of rocks called the Hell Creek Formation, which is in Montana and North Dakota, Wyoming, South Dakota, and some other places. And so the figure on the right here is a little small again, but I put a red box around the dinosaur species, or the non-bird dinosaur species. Because we know that all the non-bird dinosaurs went extinct at the Cretaceous extinction. And so the iridium anomaly and the extinction itself is at the horizontal line at 0 at the top. So if you look at these ranges of dinosaurs, where the line shows its range and the dot shows where a particular fossil has actually been found, well, you'll see that there are large gaps. No fossils of anything were found between -60 and -40 meters at all. But let's look at the dinosaurs. Does it look like they were gradually declining, perhaps? Maybe it was an abrupt extinction. What do you think for the Signor-Lipps effect? How important do you think it would be for rare fossils such as dinosaurs? So that's something to consider, certainly. All right, well, we'll pivot for the last part of the video to talk about extinction selectivity and why certain organisms survived. So if we look at the survivors, focusing mostly on ocean organisms here with the exception of dinosaurs, things like corals and clams and brachiopods and bryozoans all had, sort of lowish to moderate extinction. They definitely had extinctions. They didn't completely, sort of avoid this. You might remember brachiopods and bryozoans from the Permian extinction video, but they're not probably as familiar to you. But in general, all of these animals on the left here don't really move around, or move around very little at least, and tended to have pretty low food requirements. They don't really eat that much, particularly for things like brachiopods or bryozoans. Now, in contrast, if you look at the ones on the right that had essentially 100% extinction, so all of these flying reptile pterosaurs went extinct, all of these swimming reptile mosasaurs went extinct, all of the non-avian dinosaurs or non-bird dinosaurs went extinct, and all the ammonites went extinct. Well, what do they have in common? Well, they tended to be, sort of large, active animals that probably need a lot of food. Many of them are carnivores, so they'd be higher on the food chain with a lot of energy requirements. So that's kind of one sort of distinct pattern of selectivity. We see things that are sort of high in the food chain that need to eat a lot and are very active moving around tended to do worse at this extinction. If we zoom in on particular animals, such as clams, we can get some more clues from this. So among clams, there are ones that basically sort of eat the mud to extract organic particles out of it. This is a process called deposit feeding. And there are clams that are what are called suspension feeders that filter water and extract live plankton from it, basically. And so the deposit feeders did better than the suspension feeders at this extinction, in clams and in other groups too. And so that's what this figure sort of shows here. It's a site in Argentina, and if you look at the sort of middle column there, these ones that are deposit-feeding clams tend to be pretty rare before the extinction in the Cretaceous, and then as soon as the extinction happens, right after it, they all of a sudden become more abundant. So obviously this sort of feeding strategy they have is serving them quite well after this extinction. Well, we can also look at a group of these single-celled photosynthetic algae called calcareous nannoplankton. These organisms were, and actually still are today, so abundant in the ocean that their shells actually form entire rocks when they sink to the seafloor. And so in this location from Italy on the left here, the Cretaceous rocks are white in color because they're just filled with these shells. But the group had a really severe extinction, and then right after the extinction, their shells aren't making up much of the rock anymore. It takes a little while for them to kind of come back, and the rocks get lighter and lighter in color as you get more of these shells. So these algae are primarily photosynthetic, which means they need sunlight to get energy. And in the Cretaceous, about 90% of the species went extinct. So it's really severe extinction. But of the ones that survived, a lot of them tended to be something called mixotrophs. And mixotrophs are things that are photosynthetic but can also kind of eat bacteria and perhaps small algae to get more energy that would supplement their photosynthesis. And also many of the early species that evolved after the extinction also tended to be these mixotrophs. So we've seen, kind of overall that active sort of large carnivores did pretty bad. Animals that are able to eat kind of organic gunk from the sediment as opposed to living plankton did a bit better, and that these nanoplankton that could get extra energy from these methods other than photosynthesis did better as well. So kind of what does this all mean? What do all these things have in common? Well, so the ocean acidification that you heard about in the last video, perhaps contributed to this extinction as well, but a lot of the selectivity is consistent with this hypothesis of an impact winter. So basically, an impact winter is where the asteroid impact itself would have thrown huge amounts of rock and dust into the atmosphere, where it would have blocked, a bunch of the sunlight for years and perhaps, decades afterwards. And you may have experienced something like this, in recent years, when this, our California forest fires have been blocking out the sunlight in these very orange days where it's kind of dim and not very bright. Imagine that, but more for years. That's kind of what the Cretaceous extinction might have been like. So, blocking sunlight would obviously hurt photosynthetic organisms that need sunlight, but then that would affect the animals that eat those photosynthetic organisms. Right? If an animal needed to eat plankton, it wouldn't do so well. If they could eat dead organic stuff, it might do okay, or slightly better. Ultimately as well, predators at the top of the food chain wouldn't do as well because they need lots of food, and there wouldn't be as much to eat because the things that are eating the plants would be less common and be dying off as well. So for a lot of animals, it would have been a bad few years or decades probably. But, as with many extinctions, some animals did a little bit better than others, and they ended up taking advantage of some of these new opportunities. But that's a subject for our next video, so that's all for now, and thanks for listening.